Here we go. So I asked somebody if you started reading yet. She said, yes, I read Goodbye Columbus. I said, that's 6 weeks ahead. The stuff you're supposed to be reading now is what you should be reading now. The emails that I'm sending you about material, the stuff that we're going to be dealing with, we'll see if we can avoid having to worry about missed classes, but we have to go a little bit quicker. Read those emails I'm sending you very carefully, very thoroughly. The second day of class, we started with these slides with the pictures, and one of them was Adam and Eve being thrown out of paradise and an angel closing the door of paradise and sending this first married couple out into a world of trouble. Their children followed immediately, and there were plenty of difficulties for Adam and Eve and everybody else who came on in the Hebrew Bible. If you could only imagine, metaphorically, that as we closed the door on paradise, we tied a string to that door. Then that string became invisible for 6,000 years. But it was tied to the gates of paradise. Today, we find the other end of that string and tie it to another door of another married couple in Tsarist Russia at the end of the 19th century and connect those two worlds. The stories that we're going to read now, the original stories of the Hebrew Bible, they were written in Hebrew. The letters are the same letters that we're dealing with, the same alphabet. The language of biblical Hebrew is a totally different language with some little resonance in the language that we're going to be dealing with now in these stories. The alphabet is the same. The language is shifted to something we call Yiddish. But the concerns and aggravations are still the same. Who wrote those early books? We don't know. It's up to you to decide. What do you think? God dictated the story of Adam and Eve, or some unknown writer writing in Hebrew made up the story of Adam and Eve? We know who the author is of these next 8 stories that you're going to be reading. We know the characters, and very rarely in literature does a writer come along who knew his subject matter as thoroughly as the author that we're going to be dealing with in the next 2 weeks knew his subject matter. There are 2 names that I keep pairing together, if you noticed. One American and one Yiddish. Both of them wrote under pen names. What were they? This one is called Shalom Aleichem. His name is Shalom Rabinowitz. We'll talk about him. Who's the other name that I mentioned from time to time? Mark Twain. They're so similar. In fact, they used to call Shalom Aleichem the Yiddish Mark Twain. They used to call Mark Twain the American Shalom Aleichem. Why? What are the subject matter of Mark Twain's world? What does his name mean? What does Mark Twain mean? You know, you don't have to be an American literature major to know who Mark Twain is. You should know who Mark Twain is. Engineers, everybody should know who Mark Twain is. Mid-19th, late 19th, early 20th century writer. He was born where? Hannibal, Missouri, on the banks of the Mississippi River. He knew the culture and civilization of the Mississippi River the same way that Shalom Rabinowitz, who picked the name Shalom Aleichem, knew the East European Jewish shtetl. They both knew it so well that it's barely literature. They had a finger on a pulse, and they knew completely the value system of the world that they were describing, and they knew completely the value system of the people who would be reading their literature. I think there's hardly anything like Mark Twain and Shalom Aleichem in their capacity to understand the world that they're describing, both the characters and the subject matter that they're dealing with. This is very rare in literature. You get it a little bit occasionally in Jane Austen. I think you get a feeling that Jane Austen really knows Mr. Darcy and all those other people. You know, you get also a pretty good sense that Louisa May Alcott really knew her Little Women, and that she understood who these people were living in Concord, these transcendentalists. But not often do you get that kind of experience. This is barely literature. The people who read this stuff in the end of the 19th century said, this isn't literature. Why? I know these people. These are not strangers. These are not creations of a fictional mind, creations of a person who's trying to create characters. These are people who are my neighbors, who I know, and so there's a reality and a sociology to the life of these people that really is quite remarkable. It's just interesting that they both use pen names because they had an army. What was Mark Twain's real name? Samuel Clemens. Shalom Aleichem's real, and what's sort of similar about the two names that they picked? What does Mark Twain mean? What did he pick? Why Mark Twain? What's Mark Twain mean? It's almost got a hyphen. Mark. What's the person who says Mark Twain doing? Hanging off the end of a boat. Rana? Measuring the depth of the water. You throw something into the water, and there's a marker on it. You pick it up, you say, Mark, 10 fathoms, 5 fathoms, 2 fathoms, Mark Twain, watch out, here we're getting closer. And so you pick a name that is absolutely recognizable to everybody on either bank of the Mississippi River. Shalom Aleichem, pick what kind of a name? What does Shalom Aleichem mean? In Arabic, it is what? What is it in Arabic? Talk about cognate languages, Arabic and Hebrew. They both come from the same language tree. In Arabic, it's what? A bunch of you is taking Arab 1 and 2, Arab 3 and 4. Salam alaikum. It's the same words. And they both mean what? They literally mean shalom, salam. That word means what? Peace. Aleichem, peace be unto you. But what does it come to mean? You go up to somebody, you see him, you say goodbye, you say hello, you say, hey, shalom aleichem. It means, how you doing? How's it going? So it's a phrase that is absolutely recognizable to everybody in the shtetl, and he picked a name deliberately that's going to have that context. So this was not literature. This was something inside, and it is not idealized. It is not a glorified world. It's a world that he's showing, a world that he's talking about. Now, just let's finish up with our slides. A snapshot. This is what Shalom Aleichem intuitively instincted. He was born in a shtetl, but he got freed. Who freed him? Who got him out of the restricted neighborhood of the Pale of the Settlement? Which czar? Alexander the Second said, you can go anywhere you want, you can learn Russian, you can go to college, you can do whatever you want. The bad days for the Jews are over. Shalom Aleichem starts writing when? When the bad days return under the rotten czar, Alexander the III. So Shalom Aleichem says, this is the time I got to start writing. What's he looking at? He's looking at, this is what I'm like, the snapshot of the shtetl tradition. This is the world that Shalom Aleichem knew in his pulse. He had an instinct. He knew that most of the Jews in this part of Russia were Hasidic, had been influenced by the Baal Shem Tov and by that astonishing ability to communicate directly with your God. It was sort of orthodox, but not really as orthodox as the Orthodox had, not a rigid orthodoxy. You communicated intuitively with God, you spoke to God, and you had a Hasidic faith that the world was going to change any minute because who is coming? Moshiach is coming. Messiah is coming. I said, go over to Rabbi Bachman's, Jews, Gentiles. He likes to give you chicken no matter who you are. Go over to Rabbi Bachman's house someday. He's 4 blocks away. He is a Hasidic rabbi who is waiting for the Moshiach to come, and talk to him. You don't have to be a Jew to go talk to him. Anybody can go talk to him. He's happy to talk to anybody, and he has the Hasidic faith. He believes that the Messiah is coming and getting ready for it. This is also a world like Adam and Eve. That rope connects two people with family values. Adam and Eve, they had it made in the Garden of Eden. They got one rule. What was the rule? Don't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Well, who screwed it up? Who said, allegedly, in our historic tradition, in our anthropological tradition, Eve got him to bite the apple, and so the traditions came down from that. That was 6,000 years allegedly ago. But family values, it was always mishpocha. I asked you to repeat that word once before. I'll ask you to repeat it again now. Mishpocha. It's family. It's just what it means. When you say it, it resonates. family. I've been watching The Godfather for 4 nights now in a row on cable television. It's all mishpacha. In fact, there are a couple of Jews around that, but the Italians and the Jews, they know from family. In fact, any family, any ethnic group will know from family. And in both of them, I mean, it's not the godmother, it's the godfather. And in the shtetl, it was a patriarchal world. That was the world that came down from Adam and Eve. The patriarch, the father, the male. The beginning of women's problems started with Adam and Eve. That whatever it was, anthropologically, historically, culturally, whatever it was the man in charge. There's only one society that we talk about occasionally where the women dominated and they used to chop their men up for chopped meat and eat them, or whatever they did with them. What society was that? It's mythological. The Amazon. That Amazon world was a world of women dominating. They used their husbands, men to procreate, then they got rid of them. So they were only good for one thing, and that's what they used them for. But generally in all societies, wherever this society is, wherever a village society exists, it is a patriarchal society, and the shtetl was no different. It was family, faith, and tradition. I said the two pillars, unmovable pillars of the East European Jewish shtetl world were faith and family. Everything else rotated around them and were built on them. It was strictly faith and family. The micro family, that means the family itself, the small family, knowing what to expect. We talked a little bit about it. We talked about the eminence of males, the idea that only the male could be a Messiah, a Moshiach. So you hoped for men, prayed for men, because they could bring honor to the family. How? They could themselves become scholars. They could themselves get lucky and get wealthy. They could become Job and make it. You don't want Job's troubles, but you can make it. You could marry well. You could do all sorts of reasons and ways to bring honor to the family. The women, they were a burden. They were a problem for for any shtetl in any environment, wherever that shtetl was, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Sri Lanka, Tanzania, China, wherever. The family has had too many girls. So what have they been doing in China? What have they been doing in India? They've been killing fetuses that happen to be female. So this is something that is there for those of you who are anthropology majors to understand the nature of all of this. The micro-family, knowing what to expect. Male domination, the father is the only one who is learned. The poor mother, she doesn't know even Hebrew, basic Hebrew. The only language that she has is Yiddish. She may or may not be literate. She may or may not have gone to school. If you've got a very highly educated East European relative in your family back 5 or 6 generations, that's an exception. They did exist later on, but it's an exception. So understanding the nature of the micro-family, what the family was like. The reason I'm doing this is because you're going to read about it. Everything I'm talking about now, we're going to read about probably today. The macro family, the shtetl itself, that means the people around you, the 50, 60, or 70 other Jewish families. You lived to find out where you were in the pecking order, how good or how important your family was. You don't want to be too low. You don't want to be too poor. You don't want to be too miserable. And believe me, the shtetl under the bad czars was miserable. You couldn't, you were limited in what you could do to make a living. You had very little mobility. You had to live where they told you. The Jews had lost their civil rights. Whatever rights they had gotten under Alexander II, they lost again under Alexander III. That's what provoked these writers suddenly to decide we have to talk to these people. So it was status, honor, and walls. 2 sets of walls. What were the 2 sets of walls? Who built the 2 sets of walls? The rabbis for keeping the people from getting out, and the outside people. The rabbis built 1 set of walls to keep the people from getting out, and the authorities built another set of walls to keep the Jews in. So in a way, there was a conspiracy between those that hated the Jews and those that wanted to keep the Jews untouched by the outside world. Don't let your children or your family or anybody near them. And who are them? Or who are they? The Goyim. We don't want to have anything to do with them. As far as the outside world is concerned, we don't want to have anything to do with the Jews. So everybody was in agreement, in a sense. The authorities, the people who had their power. The Gentile world is dangerous, violent. We are not. In fact, the Jews, like the early Christians, I mean, in that 6,000-year journey, we've come through 3 religions. The earliest form of Christianity was victim. They got eaten by the lions. And the Jews now in the shtetl had become victims. And they wallowed in their own victimology. They looked up to God and say, it's all in your hands. Give us a break. Make it all happen, because we know that we don't have the power to do anything. So it was a world where if you lifted your hand in violence, the Talmud said, the rabbis said, let your hand fall off before you lift your hand in violence. So these people were wimpy. The Jews in the shtetl going on there, they simply took it. You got beaten up, you got bombarded, you prayed, you got your windows broken, and you said what? It's God's will. It's God's will. So these Jews were not really doing much to do anything. You sat back and you took it. The worst thing that could happen if somebody got out, if one of your children got out, got contact with anybody else, and married out of the faith. That was the worst thing that could have happened. That was death, literally. Now, if you don't, in the simplest level, if you don't marry the person who your father chooses, you are eligible for. That happens today. That happens today. You read about that in newspapers in several different societies that still exist, where if the kid marries outside or beyond, the arm reaches out. They come and find them in England, they'll find them in America, they'll find them wherever they happen to be looking for whatever, marrying somebody. For what reason? What's the big threat? Marrying for love. Woo! Pooey on love. Because all they care about is arranged marriage for the honor of the family. And the Jews were no different. And if you do, oh, fell off. They can hear me anyway, can't they? Hold it. Okay. And if you do convert, some communities literally kill you. The Jews just considered you dead. You were through, you were finished, we got nothing to do with you anymore, and you were gone. This is a line that's going to come up in one of the stories we read by Schlemazel. The pain is great. The pain, what the pain of what? The loss is great, but the shame is greater. So it's one thing to lose your child. It's another thing to have to face the community, friends, whatever it is. I'll write a word that you may not know how to spell, but it's called, and you see this is something that's going to come up in these stories. It's really, remember, these are Jews writing for other Jews. Nobody could read this stuff except Jews. So there's a thing in almost all of these stories called Schadenfreude. It's a phrase that Freud made up. Schadenfreude. It means the pleasure you get, the little titillating pleasure you get out of someone else's suffering. You know, your roommate says, I just came back, I got an F in calculus. You say, oh, isn't that terrible? And you get a little bit of a oots because something nasty happens to somebody, and this pathology of it probably is, thank God it didn't happen to me, but am I glad it happened to you? It's a little sick, but then after all, we are civilized people, which means we're all a little bit neurotic. So that neurosis of Schadenfreude, the pleasure you get, we see it running through these stories. So the pain is great, the shame. Above all, Tevye, as we get to him, the characters in these stories, they cannot tolerate shame from someone else in the community. Now, I'm asking you the last question, and then we go on. Who shaped your core values? How far back are your values shaped? How many of you will marry the person you choose, regardless of what your parent, how many of you feel that there is a parental hand still on your throat about who you marry? Not that many. Okay, a generation ago, it would have been probably more. After all, we are living in reasonably modern times. 5 generations ago, it would have been very, very different. Now, a brief glossary of shtetl terminology. I sent you some of these words in one of those 5 emails that I sent you yesterday and the day before. These are words that will come up in the stories, and some of you will be more familiar with them than others, but at the end of the day, I want you to all understand a little bit of what they're all about. The most important thing for the miserable people in the shtetl was, how do you put bread on the table? How do you have a living? And these are words that are a mixture of Hebrew and German and Yiddish. This is a Hebrew word. Repeat after me. Parnassa. So the whole goal is, how do you get a parnassa? How do you find a way in this terribly restricted world to make a living? How do I do this? Most of the Jews were so impoverished, as we meet, if you started reading the first story, you see he had nothing. And so these Jews are miserable, wretched. They're living in a repressed, terrible, restricted civilization, and trying desperately to find a way to make a living became almost pathological with them. This is, for the shtetl, honor. I mean, there's nothing more important than this. Repeat, yichus. It gets a little bit spittle going, yichus. Okay, it's your status in the community, where you are in the community. Are you somebody of great reputation? Do you have big yichus, or do you have a tiny little non-existent yichus? Where are you in the community? In more materialistic, what kind of car do you drive? How many of you, pathologically, in your own little neurotic way, feel it's important to have the right kind of automobile? The right to show the right message, or you see it in your parents or in your grandparents. Is it important to have those status symbols, the symbols of status? In the shtetl, they were important. If you had 2 goats, that was better than having 1 goat. You were better than the guy who had 2 goats. 1 goat. So the shtetl, your status in the community was absolutely important. We see it now. The community itself had the primary occupation was being a beggar. Beggars. You've seen them in many Arabian Nights movies, any of the Kismet movies or any of the movies you see that deal with the Arabian Nights. There's always a guy in one of those movies from Hollywood who sits there and says, in English but in Arabic, he's sitting there with a little beggar's bowl in front of him, and what does he say? You walk by and you're a wealthy man. Alms for the love of Allah. Alms for the love of Allah. Well, in the shtetl, that's what you had also. You had schnorrers, beggars. Schnorrer is a Yiddish word that has become current in German. I mean, the Germans talk about schnorren, the verb to beg. You beg, and that's what you do. That's how people made a living. The schnorrer was a beggar. 30% of all shtetl Jews had no occupation at all, so they went from door to door begging. That's what they did. Now, in Yiddish, there are about 30 different words for a loser. The Jews in the shtetl had losers the way the Eskimos have snowflakes. I mean, there were losers everywhere in every shape and every kind of little denomination. The lowest loser of all was the one who was a born loser. A Schlemazel. Repeat, a Schlemazel. Another word, by the way, that has made its way into common everyday German. The Germans will talk about Schlemazels regularly. He is a dummy, he is a wimp, he is a congenital loser. He is the ultimate wimp, and he has no yichus at all. So if your daughter ever fell in love with a Schlemazel, you're in big-time trouble. That's terrible. What makes the world go round? What makes the world go round in the shtetl is luck. Mazel. That's a Hebrew word. Repeat. Mazel. Mazel. It comes from God. These people are Hasidic. They believe everything comes from God. And if God looks upon you and says, what's the ultimate story of Mazel in the Hebrew Bible? We've gone over it a little bit. He had it, he lost it, he got it back. And it was all God's will. Job. It's Job. Job had mazel. God loved him. Then God gets involved in a conversation with Satan, and he loses his mazel. That's bad news. If that happens to you, you're a Schlemazel. Repeat, Schlemazel. Now, this is a wonderful combination word. It is, a Schlemazel is from the German. So I know some of you have taken German 1, 2, 3, 4. Schlimm, what does it mean? Bad. Schlim is the German. Mazel is the Hebrew. The Yiddish is Schlemazel means what? Bad luck. Somebody who, so it's the guy, what Job said. What did Job say? What did Job say? What? Why is this? There's a book, I talked about this book by Rabbi Harold Kirshner. When bad things happen to good people, that is what you call Schlemazel. That's bad luck. Why did bad things happen to me? So the whole idea of being a Schlemazel, someone who gets nothing but bad luck, generally it means you're surrounded by Schlemils. They tell a joke about the Schlemazel who's standing there. The Schlemiel walks in with a bowl of soup and trips himself and spills it all over the Schlemazel. So it's not the Schlemazel's fault, but he's got Schlemiels everywhere. So the Schlemiel is the klutzy loser, and the Schlemazel is somebody who's just surrounded by bad luck. The Luftmensch, these guys also, and most of these are all males. This is the ultimate, another kind of loser in the shtetl, a dangling man. One of Saul Bellows' novels is called Dangling Man. And it's about a guy like this. You're made of air, you have no substance, you have nothing, you don't have nowhere to do. You don't know what exactly to do with yourself, and you're hanging. You can't get your feet on the ground, you can't get your hands up to heaven. You're just a Luftmensch, a dangling man in the middle of air, and maybe you've met people like this that just can't get anything done, can't get anything finished, can't get anything started, or they're just made of air, no substance to them. Now, a Hebrew word, the nugget. Repeat, nugget. Did I ask you to repeat Luftmensch? Say, Luftmensch. Luftmensch, okay. A nugget is the rich Jew in the shtetl. If there was one, they use the Hebrew word a nugget. He is the rich man. How do you think the shtetl is going to respond to a rich man? They're going to hate him. They're going to dislike him. They're going to feel envy. They don't like him. We're going to get one exception in our first story. But the nugget is the rich Jew in the shtetl. He may be by dint of having one calf or one goat or one anything, because the rest of the Jews might have nothing. So if you're the rich man, you still have it. And how they behave, how they comport themselves, they have special seats perhaps at the synagogue, the one who can pay the most to get a holy seat at the synagogue, to sit. How many of your parents, those of you who are Jews, go and want to sit in special places in your synagogue and pay enormous amounts of money to have that honor, the honor of sitting in those places? Well, this has been existing in the shtetl life for generations. So the rich Jew in the shtetl, they envy him, they don't like him. Now, repeat, nachas. Again, nachas. A lot of these words are very spittable. The pleasure you get from your children, that's the ultimate joy in your life, because your children are nothing except extensions of your family. So you want to get whatever pleasure you have, and the children are there for one purpose only, and that is to provide the pleasure. Their job is to provide pleasure. Your job is to enjoy it if they give you the honor that you want. So the pleasure you get from children. Chutzpah, that's a real noisy one. Repeat, chutzpah. Insolence, audacity. There is no Yiddish word for please. Jews in the shtetl didn't say please. Very much the way the beggar in the Arabian Nights stories didn't say please. They'd say alms for the love of Allah. And you walked past them. You had the money, and you walked past. And what did the beggar say then? You're going to get cursed. Woo! You come back and you drop coins in. Or the story that they tell is a guy there who gets the same money, a good, generous tip from some rich man every day. And one day the rich man walks by and throws less money into the guy's begging bowl. And the beggar says, "What's this? How come I'm getting less?" The man says, "My business has gone terribly. I'm losing money like crazy, and I'm just having a terrible time." And the beggar says, "Look, because you're having a bad day, do I have to have a bad day? Come on, let's go." That kind of intimacy with each other. You see it also in the Hasidic intimacy with God, where the characters will say, "Hey, God, enough already. I'm poor, I'm miserable, I'm wretched. Isn't it time? Send a Messiah and let's get on with this." So you get a kind of intimacy that is arrogant in poverty. And that's what chutzpah is. Insolence, audacity. An American joke you talk about is the kid who murders his parents and then pleads with the judge for leniency because he's an orphan. That's chutzpah. That's nerve. That's, going a little bit too far. All right? And then above all, let's repeat it again, mishpocha. The family. Do not shame it. You don't shame the family. Okay. Finally, this is one of the characteristics that's going to dominate most of the stories we read of Shalom Aleichem. Repeat. Tzoros. It's troubles, aggravation, pain, and suffering. Because the world of the shtetl was a world of troubles, aggravation, pain, and suffering. So when Shalom Aleichem decides he's going to write, everybody's got troubles. Everybody's got tzoros. Now, this is the world that existed behind those two sets of walls. 1881, all of a sudden comes a bad czar. Alexander III puts on all the restrictions. The Jews are forced back into the Pale of Settlement, and all of their civil rights disappear again. And out of this, we got this emergence of a generation of Jewish intellectuals who did get liberated during the reign of Alexander II. They were they were intellectuals, they had learned Russian, they had correspondence with Tolstoy, Chekhov, and Turgenev, they knew all the big knockers around town, they had lived in the city because they could get out of the shtetl, and they were going to make the transition from Torah, the world of God, to literature. And that's where we come to now. 1881, the Jew in Tsarist Russia. Stay or what? And this is the question that the intellectuals started asking. Are we going to stay and put up with this? Or is it time, maybe, to get out? Or two things you could do. You could get out, if you could walk out of the shtetl and walk across Europe and walk to a seaport. It cost people $10 in 1881 to get on a boat and go to the United States. If you could sneak out, go, work for a couple of months at Antwerp or Lübeck or some other port or Danzig or somewhere, make enough money, you go and then work, get to the United States and maybe save up and send for your family, your children. It began. This was the beginning of the last huge wave of European immigration to the United States. We will get there also eventually and discuss that in some detail. But starting in the 1880s, two horribly poor and wretched communities of Europe began leaving. Between 1880 and 1920, millions of them left the old world and came to the new world. Who are they? They came at the same time. I got the senior citizens are in charge of this conversation here. But their fathers, they say their fathers. Who are they? Which nationalities or which ethnicities? They were all Europeans, but they were specific from two different places. The Irish came much earlier. Good answer, because it's the wrong answer. The Irish Catholics came much earlier. This was Italian Catholics and East European, Russian, Polish, Jews. The Jews and the Italians were the last great wave of immigration that left Europe from 1880 to 1920. In 1880, because of this guy, Alexander III. Why did they leave? Any Italians who know why their great-great-grandparents left? Particularly from the south of Italy, from Rome south, from Naples to Sicily. What was it? Same thing that drove the Jews out. It was Alexander III in one place. What was it in the other? The mafia. The control that those people had. They had no freedom. They had no freedom. They had no lives. And the poverty, the abject poverty of the Italians and the abject poverty of the Jews in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, they said, this is it. And they began leaving. Now, others stayed. And the intellectuals were dealing with this subject. One of our Sholem Aleichem stories is one where of leaving Shtetl. But 1881, the Jews and Tsar in Russia said, do you stay or do you go to America? Anybody been watching The Godfather on television the last couple of days? Particularly Godfather Part 2, little Vito Corleone. How did he get to America? He got on a boat as an 8-year-old kid without anybody there. And how did he get there? He got to Ellis Island, had smallpox. They quarantined him for 3 months. And then he got off Ellis Island. All you had to do in 1880 was get there. All you had to do was arrive, and you were there. The Q word didn't exist. What's the Q word? No quotas. There were no quotas. All you have to do was get to America, and you were in. And here comes the last two immigrant groups, poor, miserable, wretched, and universally hated. The Italians were Catholic. Who hated them more than anybody else? Talk about the narcissism of minor difference. The Irish Catholics. If you brought home an Irish Catholic boyfriend, if you were an Italian family and you had an Irish family, you brought home an Italian boyfriend, your mother and father would throw you out of the house. Bring anybody home. Bring home a Jew. But don't ever bring home an Italian. I mean, there was a student here about 5 years ago, she graduated already, named Emily Kenny, and she was a redheaded Irish ethnicity. And we told this story in class. She says, you know, my grandmother won't even let a can of SpaghettiOs in the house. That's how much she hates the Italians. I said, how old is your grandmother? He said 104. But she remembers, and still to this day, hates the Italians. So, I mean, some of those things just go on, and that sense of what it was all about. But either they came or they stayed behind. And so what happens from Torah to literature? And this is where we're getting to now. The writer's dilemma. The dilemma of the writer who's an intellectual, who's an academic, or who's a person who writes. Most of them wrote in Russian. Some of them wrote in Hebrew, but Sholem Aleichem himself, Sholem Rabinowitz, was a Russian writer. Sholem Rabinowitz spoke Russian at home. His language at home was Russian, not Yiddish. He was born in a shtetl, but his native language was Russian, even though he was bilingual. He could speak Yiddish and write Yiddish. And he said, you know, how to reach the shtetl. These guys were now compelled by a new drive to communicate with the poor, wretched Jews in the shtetl. Maybe they had a message. You'll decide if there was a message here. What's the message? What's the language? What's the only language the Jews in the shtetl knew? Yiddish. Now, Yiddish, to be a writer in Yiddish, even what Mark Twain did. Mark Twain wrote for those Mississippi stories along the banks of the Hannibal, Missouri, with Tom and Huck. What kind of English did he write? He wrote kind of dialect. He wrote dialect stuff. He wrote in he didn't write Ralph Waldo Emerson English. He didn't write, he wrote the way the people spoke. Well, the Jews in the shtetl spoke Yiddish, and it was a language that had no status at all. It had no yichus. It had no, it was a rag, it was a shmata. It was a nothing of a language that people used only to talk to one another in. So this was where we go from Sholem Rabinowitz to Sholem Aleichem. His dates are instructive. Born in 1859, died in New York City in 1916. He emigrated eventually. He came to America. He's buried in Brooklyn. It was, up until that time, the largest funeral cortege in New York City history. And when he died in 1916, every Jew in New York City, by that time they numbered over 1.5 million, showed up at that funeral and walked from Lower East Side, New York, all the way across the bridges to Long Island, where this guy is buried in Brooklyn, where he is now. People still go there and worship at his grave. So these were now, he was a secular intellectual. What do I mean by a secular intellectual? What do I mean by a secular intellectual? He wasn't a rabbi. He was a Jew who knew he was a Jew, very comfortable in his Jewish socks. But forget trained. He wasn't religious. He wasn't practicing. He was one of those 14 million Jews And we don't know how many Jews of the 14 million who are observant. We don't know how many Muslims of the 1.8 billion are practicing Muslims. How many of the 2.3 billion Christians practice Christianity? We don't know. They self-identify. The 14 million Jews who have self-identified in the world as being Jews, how many of them are religious? We don't know. 2 or 3 million maybe who actually hold on to the 613 commandments? Who knew? We know that this guy wasn't. He was secular. He spoke Russian. He lived at a big city. He was now going to get forced back, and he wouldn't put up with that. He wasn't going to tolerate it, and he decided he was going to communicate and write. And he creates a character. He creates a character who says, I need an everyman. I need to create a character who every Jew will recognize, read about, and understand what the issues and the problems are. And he created the character of Tevye, a Jewish everyman, a kind of a common denominator that he would write about. Now, Sholem Aleichem, his complete works are in 28 volumes. So he wrote a huge number. About 13 of them are Tevye stories. We're going to read 6 of the Tevye stories. 6. The other 2 Sholem Aleichem stories are non-Tevye stories. Of the 8 Sholem Aleichem stories we're going to read, 6 deal with Tevye. Who is he? Who is he? Sholem Aleichem knows that he will create a character who every shtetl Jew will recognize as possibly a next-door neighbor. So that's the genius. Just as everybody knew who Huck and Tom Sawyer were, Sholem Aleichem's genius was that he could create a character who was so utterly realistic to the readership, to the audience, and then he put it all together in a brilliant way. The form of these stories, if some of you might have started it, I know, all of these 6 Tevye stories are told in what form? The form is critical. The form is essential. So now you told me not to call on you, but I know you read the first story. Say it again. First person. What is it? What do we call it in literature? Chekhov. A narrative, but what do you call a narrative when somebody's doing the narration himself or herself? It's called a monologue. It's a monologue. A first-person narrator tells his own story. I mean, what's the most famous one in American literature? Call me Ishmael. Call me Ishmael. So Melville knows what he's doing. Melville pulls a fast one. Anybody read all of Moby Dick? What does he do halfway through the novel? Remember? You don't remember? What does he do? What does Melville do halfway through the novel? It's sneaky, tricky. Because you assume this guy's going to live, everything's going to be fine, and then halfway through the novel, Melville switches to the third person. And Ishmael disappears until when? The very end, when he finds himself grabbing onto a coffin and he's a survivor. So Ishmael does survive, but Melville scares you initially. But it's a first-person narrative. So Sholem Aleichem creates for Tevye a first-person narrative, an absolutely brilliant form. What does that give him to do? I talked to you several times already about 4 sets of lenses, 4 sets of eyes that you have to look through. What are they? What are the 4 sets of eyes that you look through to understand each of these stories? What are the 4 sets of eyes? 4 sets of eyes. You got a first-person monologue for the first 6 stories, which means what?
From Schlemazel.
Well, but first of all, you got Tevye. He's telling a story. So you've got to listen to what he's saying and figure out what's going for him through his eyes. Then you're right. The next person would be Sholem Aleichem. Sholem Aleichem is there. Let's see what Sholem Aleichem is going to do to Tevye to create let's see what Sholem Aleichem's message may be, or how Sholem Aleichem deals with it. Because in a first-person narration, what's one of the characteristics that will come through? The Greeks invented it in their drama. It's called dramatic. I mean, a monologue is a kind of a dramatic form. And you could be talking, and then the reader says, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Or you reveal certain things. I mean, in Greek drama, the Greek audience back 2,500 years was looking at Oedipus Rex,
and saying, for God's sake, don't get into bed with her. She's your mother. But who didn't hear it? Oedipus. Oedipus didn't hear it. So the audience has got one thing going, and you got you got Tevye, you got Sholem Aleichem creating the environment. Let's see what he wants. Then you got the audience itself, the people who at that time are reading the story. And you get the mixture of what Tevye is doing and what Sholem Aleichem is doing. So there's what do they see? And who's the fourth set of eyes? You. 125 years later, what do you make of all this stuff? So you got, that's the form, that's the irony. I mean, how many of you are people of faith? Well, we know Sholem Aleichem was not, and we know that Tevye lives and will die with his God. We know that about Tevye. So you got to understand, Sholem Aleichem is not. He's secular, but will he be satirical? Will he be vicious? Will he be gentle? Will he be kind? How will Sholem Aleichem? Sometimes, Philip Roth can be nasty. Is Sholem Aleichem going to be nasty? Well, let's see. Then how does the audience, will the audience see certain things happening? Then how are you seeing it 125 years later? What is Sholem Aleichem's purpose? You got to find out. You're going to help me. You'll decide. You'll see how he treats the characters. I mean, when Shakespeare writes King Lear, when Shakespeare writes Henry V, Part 1 or Part 2, he has something he's doing with Prince Hal. When he writes Falstaff, creates these characters. When a writer creates a character, he's doing it for a purpose. Sholem Aleichem is creating a character and characters all around him for a purpose. What's Sholem Aleichem's purpose? So 4 sets of eyes. Sholem Aleichem's art. Sholem Aleichem as a writer. Tevye wins a fortune and the bubble bursts. The first 2 stories, which I sent you my cliff notes about, are pre-daughters. It's setting the stage for Tevye. And then he's going to take him on a journey that's going to be a little bit painful, but it's setting the stage. Tevye wins a fortune and the bubble bursts. Keep in mind also that Sholem Aleichem considers himself a humorist. Like who? His other comparison, like Clemens, like Mark Twain. Mark Twain considered himself a humorist. So these are people who are basically writers with a comedic sense at their funniest. And Sholem Aleichem is creating Tevye as a comical character with gravitas, with some depth to him. So the idea is to chuckle along with Sholem Aleichem. But it's inside literature. What do I mean by that? This is strictly insider literature. I mean, what's the most interesting thing about 125 years later in you? But were you supposed to read this stuff? No, this was not intended for you. This was intended for the Jew living inside the shtetl, inside Tsarist Russia, 125 years ago. Sholem Aleichem hadn't the vaguest idea that be a bunch of kids sitting in an auditorium in Medford reading this stuff in English translation. It never crossed his mind. Never dawned on him that he would have that kind of enduring literary continuity, that it would work for him this long. So we're inside the world of Sholem Aleichem, we're inside the shtetl, and that's where we're going. Now we're going to start reading. So you have to get a sense of where we are, what we're going. I said, some of you I know have started, others of you haven't started yet. I've tried to give you as much detail as I can in those notes that I gave you, and yet you're going to have to get a sense of what's going on. This guy, so it's Tevye talking to you. How fast can you understand what this is all about and get a sense of it? I'll answer all your questions and help you as much as I can. But it's Sholem Aleichem, he's dealing with issues inside the shtetl that are special to this world as he sees it, a world that is changing dramatically. 1881, Jews are already starting to leave. They're leaving. It's a trickle. What is that trickle going to become in 20 years? By 1900? A tsunami. Because by 1900, the Jews were pouring out of Russia and the Italians were pouring out of Italy. They were coming in huge numbers, millions to the United States, New York City, Lower East Side, Little Italy, Little Israel. We're going to get into all of that. We go back after we get through with these stories first. But first, You have to know this world. You're going to get a little Quizlet in about 2.5 weeks, and you want to make sure you understand everything that you're seeing. What 2 languages are going to be? You got 3 languages. You're reading it in what? You're reading it in English. All right, so you got the gift. You're reading in English. What were the other 2 languages that you have to understand are there behind all the English? The Russian you're not going to see much. One word, dacha. You saw dacha, the Russian little hut. What other languages you have to be tiny little bit familiar with? Yiddish and Hebrew. The Hebrew is there because the Bible is never far away. Now, Tevye has been created by Sholem Aleichem as a man who thinks he's smarter and more learned than he is. And that's where the humor comes from. He thinks he really knows his Bible. And he prides himself on being smart and clever and intelligent and knowing the Bible. So he quotes from the Bible. We'll see some of those elevated biblical. The problem is you're reading it all in English, but you'll see in the original, it's in Hebrew. The letters are all the same, but it's in Hebrew. Then he adds his own commentary in. He does his own interpretation, as the rabbis did. They interpreted the Hebrew Bible. That became the Talmud. The Talmud is all the interpretations of the Bible. Tevye reads the quotation from the Bible in Hebrew and then makes his own interpretation in what? In Yiddish. And it's usually wrong and funny. Now, I said, don't worry if you don't get it. I don't know how you're going to get it. Oh, no, but that's all right. It's okay if you don't get it. I'll try to give you a little bit. But it starts out right away. Tevye wins a fortune. And this is the only story that ends with an almost completely happy ending. But it starts out with a quotation from the book of Psalms. That's from the Hebrew Bible. Who raises up the poor out of the dust and lifts up the needy out of the dunghill. It's a story of a poor man who's going to get lifted out of the dunghill. Who's that poor man? Tevye. Where's the dunghill? It's to shtetl. He's going to get lifted out of it, okay? And so he starts out. Now, who is he talking to? He's talking to Sholem Aleichem. Does Sholem Aleichem answer him? Never once. Never a word from Sholem Aleichem. Not a peep out of Sholem Aleichem. He's just sitting there. Later on, toward the last story or so, he does something interesting because Sholem Aleichem is carrying a piece of luggage. He's leaving town also. But here, it's, he's talking directly to Sholem Aleichem. If you are destined to draw the winning ticket in the lottery, Mr. Sholem Aleichem, it will come right into your house without you asking for it. As King David says, it never rains, but it pours. Did King David ever say that? No. King David didn't say that, but as King David said, it never rains. And the lottery ticket. What is the lottery ticket? The first reference in the first story that you read is about a lottery ticket. Well, what's going on now in the news all night long, all day long? What's happening out there? $500 million, people running into the local 7-Eleven store, taking their Social Security checks, cashing them, buying 15, betting on their grandchildren's birthdays. What are they into? The Kabbalah. They're into all of that mystery and magic that constitutes winning the lottery or getting a little bit of the M word. Mazel. You got to have mazel. To win the lottery, you got to be lucky. And so everyone say, hit the jackpot. I'm going to get lucky. Give me a chance. People gambling away their money. But so the first reference that Tevye makes is to the lottery. And if your number comes up, it's okay. You don't need wisdom or skill. All you need is mazel. And on the contrary, if you're not inscribed as a winner in the books of the angels, you can talk yourself blue in the face. It won't help you. He says, nothing you say will help unless your name is written down where? In the book of the angels? Well, in Hasidic, Talmudic, and Hasidic law, there is a book of angels where your name gets written down for good or for bad. That usually takes place around what holiday? Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, when somebody writes down in the book, this guy's going to get it, this guy ain't. This guy's going to win, this guy's going to lose. So Tevye is into it. Or by the first, second, or third sentence, you got a pretty good handle of who this guy is. The Talmud is right. You can't lead a horse to water, but you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. The Talmud doesn't say that at all. But you're not laughing. I understand your problem. Okay. It's all right, as long as the audience knows what's going on. That audience, they get it. The Talmud is right. You can lead it, but he thinks he knows the Talmud. He doesn't know. He doesn't know much, but he doesn't know. What makes him interesting? He doesn't know what he doesn't know. He doesn't know what he doesn't know, but the audience does. A person slaves, wears himself to the bone, and gets nowhere. He might as well lie down and give up his ghost. Suddenly, no one knows how or for what reason, money rolls in from all sides. As the passage had it, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews. That is a quotation from the Torah or the Bible. I'm not sure which one, from Torah or Talmud. I don't have to explain that to you. It should be clear to both of us that no longer as a Jew can still draw breath and feel the blood beating in his veins, he must never lose hope. I have seen it by my own experience in the way the Lord dealt with me in providing me with my present livelihood. What's the word? My present, what's the original word that was there in the original? By how the Lord gave me my present Parnassa. How I got my Parnassa. How I got my private. So what are these stories? What else is the other device? Not only are they first-person monologues, but they're also, I said it in one of my memos, every one of them is, come on, what's the form? Every one of them is flashback. What's a flashback? The events that he's describing have already happened, already taken place. So he's talking about things that have already happened. The way the Lord dealt with me in providing me with my present livelihood. For how else should I happen to be selling cheese and butter all of a sudden? So he's a dairyman now. In my wildest dreams, I've never seen myself as a dairyman. Take my word for it. The story is worth hearing. I'll sit down for a little while here on the grass. Let the horse do a little nibbling meanwhile. After all, even the horse is one of God's living creatures. Shalom Aleichem, genius. What else does he do? He creates, he's got Tevye, and then he's also got Tevye. He's anthropomorphized something. What do I mean by anthropomorphized? He's given life, human characteristics to the horse. The horse is a Jewish Schlemazel. The horse is a Schlemazel horse. Why is he a Schlemazel horse? Because he's got a Schlemazel owner. Tevye. They're two losers, right? But something happened. And now the horse can sit and nibble, and Tevye is going to tell a story to Mr. Sholem Aleichem. Okay? Well, it was in the late spring around Shavuos time. I said in one of my memos to you, there's no June 4th, April 16th, December 9th. The calendar is strictly what? The Jewish religious holidays. That's all. So every reference. Why? Because Sholem Aleichem knows that every single person who reads this is a Jew. So he's going to give you the Jewish calendar. He's not worrying about it. Even the secular Jews know when Shavuos is or Yom Kippur. Even those Jews know what's going on if you give him. So he says, spring around Shavuos time. But I don't want to mislead you. It may have been a week or two before Shavuos. Or let's see, maybe a couple of weeks after Shavuos. So Tevye is a little bit ditzy here. Don't forget, this didn't happen yesterday. Wait, to be exact, it was 9 or 10 years ago to the day. It happened 9 or 10 years ago, and maybe a little trifle more, maybe a little later. So he's the kind of guy, what does he like to do? What does he like? What does Tevye like to do? He likes to embellish. He also likes to talk. He likes to talk, and Sholem Aleichem has given him the perfect literary means to do it, a monologue. So Sholem Aleichem gets handed Tevye. You're going to love listening to this guy because Tevye just loves to go on. In those days, I was not the man I am today. Today, I got yichus. I got a parnassa. That is, I was the same Tevye, and yet not exactly the same. So he just goes, the same old woman, as they say, but in a different bonnet. You know, so he makes up sayings like this. How so? I was as poor as a man could be, completely penniless. So this is the way the shtetl was. The way that Tevye is going to describe it for him. If you want to know the truth, I'm not a rich man now either, but compared with what I was then, I can really call myself a man of wealth. I can call myself a nugget. I can call myself a nugget. I have a horse and a wagon of my own, a couple of cows that give milk, a third that is about to calve. We can't complain. We have cheese and butter and fresh cream all the time. We make it ourselves. That is, our family does. We all work. No one is idle. My wife milks the cows. The children carry pitchers and pails, churn the butter. And I myself, as you see, drive to market every morning, go from dacha to dacha in Boiberik. I gave you the geography. Boiberik is a little village where some rich people can vacation, visit with people, see this one and that one, and all the important businessmen for your hoopets who come there for the summer. Talking to them makes me feel like I'm somebody too. So talking to rich people makes me feel rich. You know, so Sholem Aleichem is not creating a perfect human being. He's creating a funny guy with very human flaws. And we're going to see what these flaws are that you can still maybe get a little chuckle about, okay? Talking to them makes me feel as I have somebody, that I amounted to something in the world. You know, I became somebody. And when Saturday comes, now that's a holy day for observant Jews, then I really live like a king. I look into the holy books, read the weekly portion of the Bible, dip into the commentaries, Psalms, Perek, that's one of the Talmudic books, this, that, something else. Ah, you're surprised, Mr. Sholem Aleichem. No doubt you think to yourself, that Tevye, there's a man for you. So what is he trying to do to Sholem Aleichem? What do we all like to do from time to time? He's bragging, and what do we want to do? We like to impress people. How many of you like to impress people? How many of you have ever tried to impress people? How many of you are going to, in the future, try to impress people? Yeah, you want to impress me. So I'm going to be myself, or should I try to be somebody a little bit more impressive than I am because my black socks keep falling down? So whatever it is, Tevye is going to try to be a little bit, he's trying to be as much as he can by reading the holy books. Because after all, how do you get yichus? You can have it by parnasa, or you could have it by being especially knowledgeable about the holy books. Anyway, what did I start to tell you? He's forgotten already. He's not going to have an easy time keeping you track. I have a hard time. That's right. Those days, was Tevye a pauper then? With God's help, I starved to death. Now, I've known in the past, I've given that line to help on an identification in the first exam. I picked, these are all the first part identifications. Our second part comes quotations that we're reading right now. With God's help, I starved to death. What does that reveal about Tevye? How do you interpret that? How did the audience interpret it? What is Sholem Aleichem trying to say? This man's life is consumed by his faith, by his religion. You know, he's not, God's help, I starved to death. Because why is it with God's help? Because that's what God intended for me. That's the way it was. I and my wife and children, 3 times a day we starved to death, not counting supper. It's a little funny. I worked like a horse, pulling wagon loads of logs from the woods to the railroad station. For I am ashamed to admit it, half a ruble a day. And that not every day either. And on such earnings, just try to fill out those hungry mouths, not counting that boarder of mine, the poor horse, whom I can't put off with a quotation from the Talmud. You know, he says, how the hell am I going to feed my family on a half a ruble a day? So what does the Lord do? Again, it's the Lord. He is great and all-powerful God. He manages the little world wisely and well. Seeing how I was struggling for a hard crust of bread, he said to me, do you think, Tevye, that you have nothing more to live for? That the world has come to an end? Is that what you think? You're a big lummox. Soon you will see. If I will it, your luck can change. In one turn of the wheel. Your what? Your mazel can change in one turn of the wheel, and what was dark as the grave will be full of brightness. That's how much power I got, says God. And Tevye says, you better believe it, buddy. As we say on Yom Kippur, the Lord decides who'll ride on horseback and who will crawl on foot. Maybe that's what they say on Yom Kippur, but it doesn't say that exactly in the Torah. But Tevye says it. God decides. He writes your name down. He says, you got a horse, you crawl. The main thing is hope. A Jew must always hope, must never lose hope. And in the meantime, what if we waste away to a shadow? For that we're Jews, the chosen people, the envy and admiration of the world. Irony, is he telling, is this chutzpah? He's saying, hey, God, thanks a lot. Thanks a million. You really did nice by your chosen people. We're all starving to death, right? Anyway, this is how it happened. He gets back to his story. As the Bible says, and there came the day. One evening in summer, I was driving through the woods on my way home with an empty wagon. My head was bent, my heart was heavy. The little horse, poor thing, was barely dragging its feet. Ah, I said to it, crawl along, Schlemazel. So he calls the horse a Schlemazel. Watch out, I use one spelling, the text will use another spelling. That's okay, you pick one spelling and stay with it. If you're Tevye's horse, you too must know the pangs of hunger. All around was silence. Every crack of the whip echoed through the woods. As the sun set, the shadows of the trees stretched out and lengthened like our Jewish exile. Like our Jewish exile. We've been in exile for how long? How long have the Jews been in exile? I mean, references that you should pick up on. Now. They got driven out when? Now, they're driven out of the Holy Land? Right after the time of the beginning of Christianity, 70 AD and then 135 AD, they were driven out. And they've been in exile ever since, he says. Darkness was creeping in and a sadness filled my heart. Strange, faraway thoughts filled my mind. Before my eyes passed the images of people a long time dead. And in the midst of it all, I thought of my home, my family. I thought, woe unto all of us. Ve's me, he says. The wretched, dark little hut that was my home. The children barefoot and in tatters, waiting for their father, the Schlemazel. The horse is a Schlemazel, and Tevye is a Schlemazel. Maybe he would bring them a loaf of bread or a few stale rolls. And my wife, grumbling as a wife will. Children I had to bear him, 7 of them. I might as well take them all and throw them in the river. May God not punish me for these words. Who is she? He quotes his wife. Who is she talking to? He's not talking to Tevye. She's talking about him in the third person. Who's she talking to? Children I had to bear him. She's talking to God too. She talks to God, understands Yiddish. She's talking to him. They're both talking to him. So God talks to, she's talking to God too. Children I had to bear him. 7 of them. So we know Tevye's got 7 daughters. 7 children. How do we'll soon find out that he is the consummate, ultimate, total Schlemazel? Why? Because all of his children are girls. That is a dirty joke in the shtetl. You got 7 kids and you got 7 daughters? You got nobody even left to say the prayers because women did not say the prayers for the dead or anything else. You had 7 daughters. They couldn't even go up to the Torah because women stayed in the back. They didn't even go near them because they also suffered, you never knew, from the curse. I mean, the women had 613, there were 613 commandments that the men had to observe. The women, by tradition, only had to do 3. I sent this to you. In the shtetl, the women had to do 3 acts of piety. What were they? Not totally cook. They did that normally, but what were the 3 acts that were specified in traditional Talmudic literature? Light the Friday night candles, make the bread on Friday night, the challah on Friday night, and the third one, all written by men, were the laws of ritual purity. Those 3 things join Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The idea that the menstruating woman is an abomination and must not be allowed to go near any holy writings or any holy objects. So that sort of idea of what women have learned on called the curse has emerged. And that's a lot of the Talmudic writing deals with the laws of what they call nida, the laws of ritual purity for women. It's just an interesting aspect of it, but Golda knows her role in life. Now, she's also yelling. She's talking to God and she's complaining. How does the Jewish woman in the shtetl get her status? By marriage to, she hopes, somebody who doesn't turn out to be a Schlemazel, or worse, a Schlemiel. But Tevye can talk, so when they probably, although how was this marriage fixed? I mean, how did they get married? How did they get married? They were probably married, engaged when she was 12 and he was 13. And the marriage had been arranged between the two parents, so 4 parents. It was an arranged marriage. I mean, those of you who have played already in Fiddler on the Roof on the stage, you know that one of the songs that Tevye sings to Golda is what? Do you love me? What does she say? What the hell has love got to do with our marriage? And it really didn't. It had nothing to do with it. It had nothing to do with it. That's the way it was. And so this was a world that they, and so the Jewish woman in the shtetl who didn't get the yichus, the status that she needed through her husband, became extraordinarily embittered. And when we get into it a little bit further, we will discover, in fact, in this story, we will discover the Jewish woman's capacity to curse. The Jewish shtetl wife cursed everybody, cursed her husband, cursed her children, cursed God, cursed everybody because of the fact that she was married to a loser, as she is. But she'll complain anyway. I might as well take them out and drown them in the river. May God not punish me for these words. You know, don't listen. I only said it, but don't believe it. You can imagine how I felt. We're only human. The stomach is empty and words don't fill it. If you swallow a piece of herring, you want some tea. For tea, you need sugar, and sugar, I'm told, is in the grocery store. My stomach, said my wife, can get along without a piece of bread, but if I don't have a glass of tea in the morning, I'm a dead woman. All night long, the baby sucks me dry. You know, this is real life. And Sholem Aleichem is writing for other Jews in the shtetl to see what the nature of shtetl life is like. It's miserable. It's wretched. It's terrible. Don't romanticize it. And Sholem Aleichem is not romanticizing it. He's showing it the way he knows the audience understands it and the way the characters. All right? But in spite of everything, we're still Jews. We still have faith. When evening comes, we have to say our prayers. You can imagine what the prayers sound like if you that just I'm about to begin Shemini Esrei, the evening prayer, when my horse suddenly breaks away as if possessed by the devil. These people also believe in devils and spooks and spirits. And I ran wildly off into the woods. So the horse takes off. The scene itself is funny because Tevye is running after the horse, and what else is he doing? He's saying the evening prayer and yelling at the horse, trying to get the horse under control. So I can't even have to read every line. So it's a combination of Hebrew and Yiddish. It's Hebrew and Yiddish, and you should be laughing, and I don't hear too much laughing. But that's all right. He's pleading to God. God's will. I know what's going on. Thanks a lot. Everybody else who doesn't believe in you will pay for this. And then the bottom of page 25, or 11 or 25, whichever page you look at, suddenly the horse stopped. In a hurry, I finished Shemini Esrei. I finished up my evening prayers in what language? In Hebrew. Lift up my eyes, and behold, 2 mysterious creatures coming toward me out of the forest, disguised or at least dressed in the strangest fashion. So 2 women come out, 2 creatures. Thieves, I thought, but corrected myself at once. What is the matter with you, Tevye? You've been driving through this forest for so many years by day and by night. Why shouldn't you suddenly begin to worry about thieves? And swinging my whip over my head, I yell at the horse, "Giddy-ap! Mister!" One of the 2 creatures calls out to me, "Stop! Please stop! Don't run away, mister! We won't do you any harm." What language is she speaking? Yiddish. Now, the Yiddish of rich people is no different than the Yiddish of poor people. It's a common denominator. It's not like England, where your accent determines what your status is. You know, the British accent. Well, there are no accents here. Jews in the shtetl spoke Yiddish whether they were rich or whether they were poor. She's missed an evil spirit. Right away he thinks, woohoo! It's a dibuk, a ghost, a spirit. I said to myself, and a second later, "You ox, Tevye, you ass. Why should evil spirits come to you all of a sudden?" And I stopped the horse. I looked the creatures over from head to foot. They're ordinary women. One elderly with a silk shawl on her head. The other, a younger one with a sheitel. I gave you a little gloss of what a sheitel is. It's a wig that married Jewish women wear. They cut their hair short. For whatever reason, the Torah tells you, the Torah doesn't say anything about it. It's a Talmud that says Jewish women should cut their hair short. Some rabbi said it'll make you look less attractive, and you don't want to look too attractive. Whatever reason, married Jewish women wear a sheitel. They're both flushed down to their breath, a wig. Good, now they wear Gucci wigs, like $500, $600 good. They were good-looking wigs. Listen to him going on. They say, that's enough. You say one word there. He says, good evening, I say, crying out loud. Excuse me, I skipped the paragraph. Good evening, I cry out loud, trying to sound cheerful. Look who's here. What is it you want? If you want to buy something, all I have is a gnawing stomach, a heart full of pain, a head full of worries, and all the misery and wretchedness in the world. They say, listen to him. What is he talking? Because the conversation is going to be one filled without please. It's chutzpah. The two of them start talking to one another. We got 1 minute to wrap it all up. You have to read this story over the weekend. Read the next story. Read at least these two stories. If you're so inclined, these two stories set the tone. These two stories set the tone of Tevye. The daughters take over in the third story, Modern Children. 2:45, I didn't get where I wanted to, but read these two stories. Then we'll only be two behind. If you can read into the daughters, that's when things start falling apart reasonably. The second story is also Tevye gets greedy and loses his head. Nah, we didn't get all the way.